Okay.
Let me see what I have to do here. Maybe.
Okay, so it's time to start. And maybe after, if Gerardo Rodriguez gets, so after he can join us. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the start, please, the staff, we are ready. Can we start? I think we can start.
Okay, you will tell us the time, maybe 2 minutes.
Yes, of course, I'm going to present. Yes, it's starting recording in progress. Okay. Good afternoon. We welcome the audience to this special joint panel between AMEI and the Italian Association of Political Science. I have the pleasure to moderate this panel. I think the organizing committee of AMEI and the staff to make possible this meeting. I will introduce the distinguished panelists who are with us this afternoon, but first I remember that each of you will have 15 or 20 minutes. It's 15. Each of you, if you are the 4 panelists. And at the end, we will have about 20 minutes for discussing some questions. The audience can write the questions and comments in the chat. If there is a special question for one of the panelists, just let me know it by the chat. The panel will be in English, so please write your questions in English. I will read the panelists now, the panelists' curriculum profiles. I appreciate if you present your works after reading your profiles. I made some changes in the program. I said it to the audience. First, we will start with Professor Fulvio Atina. So I'm going to read his profile. Professor Fulvio Atina is a Professor Emeritus of Political Science and International Relations and Jean Monnet Chair at the University of Catania, former Chair of the Italian Association of Political Science. He has served in the governing bodies as the European Consortium for Political Research and the International Studies Association, between others. He is visiting professor at the universities in America, Asia, and Europe. He is the author of several books and articles in scientific journals. His book, The Global Political System, has been published in several languages. His research interests are the world order transition and the world climate change policy. So he has several books. The last one is World Order Transition and the Atlantic Area in 21. And well, really he has a very big curricula. So just now, please, Dr. Atina, you have the voice now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Lourdes, for your kind presentation. Let me say first that I am very glad to be in this panel and to participate in the conference of the Mexican Association of International Studies, representing the Italian associations and also the standing group of international relations, but here there is the chair of the standing group, and probably he will tell you something about it later. So my presentation is about world scale problems, world order transition, and multilateralism. I make use of a PowerPoint, so let me see if it is okay. Can you see it?
Yes, yes, we can.
Great. So the presentation is about the overlapping of more or less 4 processes that are going on in contemporary world politics. Here you see the world disorder or world order transition, in my view. The American world order created at the end of the Second World War is quite delegitimized and in a increasing delegitimation process. Therefore, probably we are living in a time of transition to a new world order. United States, of course, and China are the candidate for leading the new world order, but still there are many uncertainties on how this transition will occur and what will be the future of the world order. In the same time, we are living in the last few years in a world where so-called sovereignism or nationalist populism is increasing. And this is associated with a growing mistrust toward multilateralism. Lastly, with COVID, but not only with COVID, we are experiencing a growing number of world-scale problems that need to be managed somehow. And, well, multilateralism has been the way of responding to these world-scale problems in the past. As I say, multilateralism is a polysemic word. That's to say, there are many pieces of reality that policymakers, observers, also students of international relations call as multilateralism. I mean, from, for example, the G7 or G20, which are simply but important meetings of head of states and government, to any small or large associations of countries. However, the word was introduced in contemporary world affairs at the end of the Second World War. As you probably know, it appeared in the conference that created the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. Well, in the lower part of this slide, you see a chain, that's to say, with multilateral institutions or multilateral policymaking institutions, it is possible to respond to problems of the world political system, or especially to world-scale problems. And the response could be a world policy, and at the end, all the states that participate in making these world policies have to adapt their national policies to the world policies. In this way, we have a multilateral response to world problem. This, as I show in this slide, has been created immediately after the Second World War. The coalition of the victorious state, led by the United States, focused on some main problems, world problems. I remind this, the problems were finance and currency stability, reduction of trade tariffs because they created the conditions for war, then defending all the national state from aggression, and last, the problem of decolonizing the world. Well, to face this problem, they created the world institutions, and these institutions produced world policies, which are in the responsibility of the single government to implement by means of national policies and national legislations. This has been successfully made, I say, in the first 20, 30 years after the Second World War, but then the world order and these multilateral policies entered in a time of delegitimation, especially the finance and trade policy decreased their effectiveness. Security from aggression. Here is security from the aggression that puts under threat the life of a state. That's to say, when a state is the object of an aggression by another state for full conquest of the other states. There are many other types of insecurities, also physical insecurity of the states, but the policy that has been approved with the United Nations statutes and chapter 6 and 7 is for defending the survival of the state to deadly aggression. And from this perspective, this multilateral security policy has been successful. No state has been conquered by another. Decolonization has been a completely failure. And probably we have some important large-scale problems because of this. Then new problems came to the surface, and some of them are in the pipelines of multilateral institutions, some are not. But at the same time, the decline of world order continued, and we are now in this phase of, I say, order transition. Now, there is a link, certainly, between order transition and decline of world order and the effectiveness of multilateral institutions. They meet with many difficulties in producing multilateral policies. Well, I go with this slide, which is an example of multilateral policy making, and this is the example of the climate change world policy. As you know, there is much debate. What has been agreed finally in Paris 6 years ago is a good, I would say, world policy, although there are some aspects that are very much criticized. Now, this policy, as well as the trade, finance, and security policy after the Second World War, this policy is made with a full-fledged multilateral policy making. That's to say, the countries agree on some principles for making the public policy. In particular, in this case, as you can see on the upper left side, the principle and goal is to avoid dangerous interference of greenhouse gas emission with the climate system. They created an institutions, the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change is a very long name, which was given to the convention, but has been also used for the institution that has this name, and produced after, well, the United Nations Framework Program Convention was created in 1992, and only in 2015 the negotiation was enough successful, I would say, producing this agreement that all the countries, that more than 190 countries, accepted and are with great difficulties implementing. The last feature of this policy making is that they have also received the duty to be supervised by the institutions and produce a report every 5 years on what they do for implementing the policy. So this is a good example of what I mean and what is effective multilateralism. However, there are many different characteristics that apply to different multilateral institutions. Not all of them are so, I would say, perfect regarding the main features. First of all, world policy is effective if it is legitimate. It is legitimate if all the countries participate in making the policy. So if the decision-making rules within the institutions give this right of determine the final decisions to all the states. Of course, the states are unequal, so some of them are better prepared for this role, some not. But in principle, multilateralism is effective, it is legitimate, and therefore, if all the countries participate in making the decisions. And this is true only for today, the World Trade Organizations, for the institutions for climate change, while some institutions like the financial, the Bretton Woods institutions, and also the Security Council of the United Nations for their own policies have not these equal decision rights of the states. However, they are considered legitimate. That's to say, the countries accept this inequality because the institutions produce some public goods. But these public goods are not goods for all, and therefore there is delegitimation, opposition delegitimation. Then another important condition is that the institutions monitor the implementation, may support also some states.
Professor, sorry, 1 minute.
Okay.
Please.
Because the policy is effective if it is implemented. Sometimes aid to states that have a problem in the implementation is needed, and this is the case for the IMF and the Convention for Climate Change, and then there should be a mechanism for updating the policies in order to keep its effectiveness. And this is the case of the climate change policy. So, and this is my last slides, I say that world policies produced with this mechanism of multilateral policy making support the world order. That's to say, if the world policies is implemented with consistent policies of the states, then all the states respond to world problem in the same way, homogeneously. Therefore, there is order. Order means that there is no conflict between the states because the states use the same response to face a problem. When the state do not produce consistent but inconsistent policies toward a shared worldwide problem, then of course there is conflict because the policies of the state are in conflict with one another, and there is disorder. Well, the state today, the state of us today is that the three foundational world policies created after the Second World War, security, finance, and trade, meet with a lot of opposition, delegitimation, and so there is growing mistrust toward multilateralism. The climate change policies, which is in the process of being implemented, but it seems that because of the seriousness of the problem, there is a will by the state to implement convergently this policy. It seems that it works. So is a case in contrast to the existing delegitimation of multilateral policy. Then, since we are in a transition, order transition phase or stage, you see the link, the ties existing between using this mechanism, multilateral policy making, and order transition. It depends on the legitimacy that the coalitions of countries that want to change the world order, the legitimacy they give to multilateralism. And this is still in doubt, uncertain. It is in the responsibility of all the countries, but is, of course, mostly in the responsibilities of the countries, the two countries, probably United States and China, that are working for making the coalitions that will change order.
Okay,
so
thank you.
I stop here, and if there are questions, I will go on.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Atina. Now we have the presentation of Professor Emilio Dodato. He is Professor of International Politics and Comparative Politics at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University for Foreign Years of Perugia, where he is also coordinator of the PhD program in Linguistic, Philological, Literary, and Political Social Sciences. He has taught at the Universities of Florence and Bologna, and others like Istanbul and others in Europe. His research activity covers international relations theory, foreign policy analysis, and Euro-Mediterranean studies. His most recent books include The Diplomat, Populism, and Foreign Policy in Italy, between others. So please, Professor Deodato, you have the voice now.
Thank you very much, Lourdes. I'm also very glad to be with you today. As chair of the Standing Group on International Relations in Italy, I really hope that this is the first meeting and we can find a way to strengthen our relations between the two associations of political science in Mexico and Italy. I will share the screen and I will start my presentation. Let me say that, this is really the first step of a new research that I'm trying to approach in the last 2 years maybe. And I started this research during the Italian lockdown. And this was kind of an exercise for me. Think what is the most important word to analyze in order to understand what we are facing in our very hard times. And the answer for me was trust. So I start to try to understand how this word is used in international relations literature. And the first thing that I have to say that we know that international politics takes place under the condition of anarchy. So we have to ask two questions. Does it necessarily follow that fear, not trust, but fear, is the only possible way of coping with such a condition of anarchy? And the second question is, is it correct what a very important scholar, often quoted, Mersheimer, said in 1994, that there is little room for trust among states? So the answer is no. Trust is not an irrelevant issue in international relations. By looking at the literature, we find a large scientific production of the role of trust, and at least three approaches emerge in the literature. The first one is the normative account of trust, which gives pride or place to individual agency and to moral sense. The second one is to consider trust related to a rational choice calculation and a way to achieve cooperation among states. And the last approach is, I mean, we can say in general, constructivist approach, is the understanding of trust as a social phenomenon. And in some case, as we are going to see, is also a way for formulating a new functionalist theory of international politics. So anyway, even though we have so many approaches and so many references to the word trust in international relations, we have a problem. And the main problem is that trust is not a freestanding political concept. We can find so many different meanings of this word, and what we can say that maybe Mersheimer was right, but not that there is little room for trust among states, but maybe there is little room for trust in describing in international relations. It's the risk of marginalization of the word. But what I tried to do in my preliminary research, as I told you, I'm just in the first phase of my research, is to try to figure out two concepts of trust. The first one, in my opinion, is trust as confidence. And the second one is trust related to trust networks. And these two concepts are very different. We can find two very different meanings of trust. And what I try to do in the second part of my speech today is to understand if one of the two meanings is more useful than the other in order to questioning empirically the realist argument made by Mearsheimer that trust is not important in international relations. So trust as confidence. So I have no time to go in details, but I want to tell you something that for me is very important, that trust as confidence has two, it's the meaning of trust of two different approaches, the normative one and the rationalist one. They are very different approaches, but they have the same idea of trust. We can see the last line of my presentation, or my slide, and as you can see, we have the possibility of strategic trust. Strategic trust is the trust of rationalists, of the rational choice calculation, and the grammar of strategic trust indicates that actor A, the first state, trusts actor B to do something. So it's very different from the normative approach, in which we have state A or actor A that trusts in general. So what is called generalized trust. So it's very different, but these two approaches have something in common. And what they have in common is that trust is considered as confidence. So we need to be confident that someone will reciprocate cooperation. So if I'm confident that you are going to cooperate with me, I can do something different in my behavior. And for rationality as a kind of rational choice, or for my way of life, my way of think about how to stay in this world. It's pretty the same, but even though these two approaches are very similar in the way they understand trust, they are very different in the development of the two different theories. So rational choice theory during the Cold War was evolved considering confidence very important, and at the end arriving to deny any role to trust in terms of social norms, in terms of emotions. And we can read this sentence of Axelrod, maybe you remember this famous book, The Evolution of Cooperation. At the end of this book, it's one of the most important book about rational choice and cooperative behavior. The main point of this book that we need no trust in order to have cooperation. So cooperation is something natural when states have can have a mutual confidence and for cooperation, and that is very different from the normative approaches. I found a very interesting definition in combining Do you remember the idea of anarchical society of Helmut Bull and the idea of social capital of Robert Putnam? So it's the idea that we have a kind of anarchical social capital in the world. And in this case, we need to understand emotion. We have to understand ideas of leaders. So the normative approach, after the decision of the rationalists to stop to give relevance to trust, went in total different direction. Studying, for example, biographies of important leaders. For example, Professor Attina described the foundation of the liberal order at the end of the Second World War. And we have a lot of studies about how the multinational system was created first in the mind of the leaders, and then in the construction, in the foundation of the international organization. So we have a lot of studies about it. But at the same time, I have to say that even though there are many differences between the normative approach and the rationalist approach, they share the same idea of trust as confidence, not confidence on the base of calculation, but confidence on the base of ideas, emotion. We can find the same with another path of research that use opinion polls, surveys about how citizens have an idea of the world. There are citizens that believe that all around the world we have enemies, foreigners, and we have to defend ourselves. So they are inspired by fear. But there are many citizens that believe that trusting is better, and we can have a better world. For example, we have a lot of studies about differences between the Republicans and the Democrats in the United States, in how the two different electorates feel about international relations. But let me just read the last sentence. We can ask, but it's really important, this kind of trust, to understand cooperation. So what trust adds to our understanding of cooperation, international regimes, etc. So I found that, I'm going to conclude, another approach is most important, and is that one that starts from the conception of trust as related to trust networks. A turning point in this direction occurred in 1979 when Niklas Luhmann published a very important book. And in this book, trust is considered as a way to face complexity, a way to face our times of modernity, the discovery of the so-called risk society. In the idea of Luhmann, people can trust or not, but trust is a way to reduce the risk that we have in our life. I can use fear, I can use other instruments to face the complexity of life, but trust is a way to face the complexity of our world. And it's the opposite of confidence. Since when I trust, I'm not confident. I put myself on risk with other person. But why? Because I need, in order to reduce complexity. This is what Luhmann wrote in his book. So how we can try to empirically use this kind of conception, trust in international relations. I have to say that in our world, after the COVID-19, but in general, we can witness the regression from the discovery of the possibility of an agent to behave trusting others in order to reduce risk. And let me think about the so-called revenge of God. Religion is really important in international relations right now. But let me quote Luhmann when he wrote that the discovery of risks as a general feature of life does not facilitate the task of religion. So there is room for behave not using I don't know, conspiracy theory or other kind of instruments to face the complexity, the uncertainty of the world. And this is trust. But how we can study how trust works in international relations. And I think that we have to connect trust with trust networks. Trust networks are connections between people across countries and people that decide to establish networks to reduce risk. We can find in history so many networks like this in terms of economy and international groups, but I have no time to go in more details. I think I have just 2 minutes. And so I want to conclude to giving you 2 examples of trusting relations. The first one is the US-USSR nuclear relations during the Cold War. Yes, in my opinion, this is an example of a false positive. So we think that we have trusting relations, but it's not a trusting relations. It's relations made on confidence. When the United States and the USSR decide to cooperate at the end of the Cold War in the 80s, they try to find a way to be confident each other. So it was not a very trusting relations. Not by chance, President Ronald Reagan used the word trust but verify. And so they try to put in order some confidence building measures. So they try to build a confidence relations. And this is not a very trusting. It's a kind of institutionalization of trust, what we can find in autocratic regime inside the state. But we have not a world government. So, for example, after the so-called...
Professor, please, sorry, 1 minute, please.
1 minute, yeah. For example, think at the World Trade Organization. They try to introduce confidence building measures at the crisis of this organization, but it was a failure. And a very different is the relations, for example, I use another example, the sample of relations between United States and Japan. And if we study the relations between the United States and Japan, we find really a trusting relations. And we have a kind of patron-client relations. United States are very strong. Japan was not strong at the end of Second World War. But still today, they are very related. They very trust each other. And Japan trusts the United States, putting at risk national security. In a region where there is China, where there is North Korea, it's not easy for the Japanese.
Sorry, Professor, can you conclude, please?
Yes, this is my conclusion. It's not easy to do that. So that's the reason why, in my opinion, the way to study trust and to understand also multilateralism is to look at foreign policies that involved trusting relations and trusting networks. Thank you, and sorry for taking 1 minute more.
Thank you very much, Professor Diorato. So now we are going to listen Doctora Marcela López Vallejo. She is a full-time professor at the North American Research Center of Universidad de Guadalajara in Mexico. She has been an international relations professor for more than 20 years. She was General Secretary of AMEI. She worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and at the Ministry of Public Education in Mexico, as well as she was doing lobby for the Borson Mexico firm. She belongs to the Mexican National Research System and is part of the editorial board of Latin American policy. She has been fellow of the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies in the United Kingdom. She has several academic and policy-oriented publications on North American regionalism, transnational governance, environment, climate, energy, policies, etc. Her 2 books, the latest, addresses the role of the sub-state actors in carbon markets and environmental policy in North America. Thank you very much, Doctora Marcela López Vallejo. Please, you can start your presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. Thanks to the Italian Association of Political Science and AMEI for sponsoring this panel. I'm going to try to be efficient in time. I set up my clock at 15 minutes, so okay.
Thank you.
So the topic of this panel is multilateralism in a renewed order.
Sorry, Marcela, we can see the full screen.
Sorry?
We cannot see your full screen, please.
Oh.
Sí, estábamos viendo, ¿eh? Sí.
Yes, pero estaba como mal orientado.
Okay.
No, se veía bien. A ver, vuélvela.
Se veía incompleto la pantalla.
Okay.
No, se veía bien.
Okay, a lo mejor, maybe it's
a computer. I'm going to put it in this format. It's more efficient and it avoids some formatting problems. Okay, so the panel is about multilateralism, and I thought that a new approach to multilateralism.
Sorry, but you can share your presentation, please.
Yeah. A new approach to multilateralism would be welcome in certain topics, especially in the topic of climate policy. Now that we're facing the Glasgow COP26 meeting coming in the next few weeks. Okay, so the presentation is ready. In a little bit more practical approach to multilateralism, when we assess how traditional climate multilateralism has performed through the more than, 26 or plus 30 years since we had the first IPCC panel meeting, we have, in terms of goals and in terms of results, the traditional multilateralism, though that multilateralism of states has failed, definitely, in terms of results, in terms of greenhouse reductions, and in terms, especially in how we establish policy goals in our countries. So this multilateralism based on purely state-centric climate goals seems to not be working for the urgency of the problem that we're facing. And here, well, you're seeing this chart where if we follow the current policies with ambitions or not ambitions, we will definitely be in 2090 or something in this century around the 3 to 5 degrees of increasing temperature. The goal, as you remember, is 2 or 1.5 degrees. So if we follow the pledges, what we say we're going to do, and if the world does what it's committed to do, we still reach the three centigrade threshold. So we're not doing enough. As states, we have had a lot of achievements in terms of institutional building, capacity building, funding. However, in the pure results, it seems we're not doing what we need to do. Another example of this failure of the traditional multilateralism, climate change, is the goals. One of what the previous slide spoke about the actions, the pledges, and the current policies, but even the goals are not that ambitious as we might want. For example, the goals for the 2050, not 2030 development goals, but 2050. Most countries are trying to get to net zero mitigation, which means that that they will reduce as much as they produce in terms of pollution. However, only 2 countries have achieved the net zero goals today, which is Burma and Suriname, which are the green ones here and over there. The blue ones are those putting these goals into law, which are also very few, some European countries, Canada. The rest of the countries, most of the countries are in purple, different shades of purple, which mean that they are putting these goals in policy documents, which, as they are not laws, they will, in terms of political change, well, if a new administration of a new political party with different orientation comes along, they may be wiped out, as it happened in the United States with Trump. And the rest of the world, the grays, the reds, and the oranges, they're not even thinking about it, right? Or they don't have the capacity to do it. So in terms of goals and actions, I guess multilateralism in terms of the state-centric approach is not working, has not worked. So what kind of multilateralism do we need to overcome today's inconsistency between goals, actions, and results, especially for the climate change governance structure? So multilateralism, yes, of course, a traditional approach, the states are here to stay. But as Professor Atina was saying, we're in a time of transition of multilateralism, where multilateralism needs to become more open. Here you see 2 pictures. One is the G7 last meeting in Cornwall in the United Kingdom, which, like visually, they are working in open spaces, right? However, open spaces in the G7 mean that the G7 is working as an informal gathering, informal political influential institution, which is delivering more results than maybe the COP26 or all the different protocols and the Paris Agreement, etc. More ambition, more realistic. And the other picture is John Kerry hosting, well, alongside with Joe Biden, hosting the Leaders Climate Summit in April of this year. And, virtuality has given us more space, more open spaces for including some other voices. This meeting, well, it was supposed to be hosting 40 leaders. However, the participation opened up to different NGOs, to different agencies within national governments, to security institutions worldwide, to other sorts of institutions. So if we're thinking of state-centric multilateralism, we need to change the way we communicate within these networks of multilateralism. However, if we really want to be realistic, we need to, and this is the argument of this presentation, to have an articulation to co-produce public goods in terms of including a diversity of diplomatic agents. So up until here, we're talking about traditional diplomacy, traditional diplomats, traditional statecraft. However, when we assess the history of the Conference of Parties of the climate change regime, we see that in 2017, it was the first time that one country, we're talking about the UN, right? The one country had two official delegations. One was aiming for clean fossil fuels. The other one was aiming for decarbonization, which was an approach more close, well, to the goals of the COP23. Not surprisingly, the clean fossil fuels delegation was represented by all Trump's aides, Trump's friends and Trump's team. For example, we have here a representative of the ExxonMobil company, a representative of coal, of gas, of nuclear, of all this pro-fossil approach to climate change. However, in the other part, in the other channel of diplomatic agency, it was Jerry Brown, the ex-governor of California, and Michael Bloomberg, the ex-mayor of New York, in a delegation aiming for decarbonization. They set the precedent for the next Conference of Parties in Katowice and in Madrid. Last year it was suspended. So in these two Conference of Parties, we also had clean fossil fuels delegation, but also we had a more influential others diplomatic agents presence there, even recognized by Patricia Espinosa, the director of the UNFCCC, right? We had also coalitions and articulation of networks. Maybe we're talking about trust networks here, Professor Diodato, coalition under 2 degrees, and we're still in. So these new agents are opening spaces within the traditional multilateralism scheme, and they are they're giving fresh implementation capacities to international agreements. Also, if we're having a discussion towards Glasgow COP26 in the next few weeks, we need to talk about the main points of discussion that will be present there. One is Article 6 regarding how to create a global carbon market. However, if we look towards the new multilateralism approach guided by local governments, we already have two very successful carbon markets going on, which is the California, Quebec, and New Scotia one. There are subnational entities cooperating in networks, and the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is in northeast of the United States. The Chinese market started also from bottom up, from the provinces to the national level. So if we are discussing a global carbon market, why not go to the already performing local experiences? We have also this discussion on Article 8 about loss and damage and the Green Fund. How do we give all the money to whom, right? So new multilateralism acknowledges different types of cooperation, especially that cooperation which transcends the aid approach. In Spanish, we call it asistencialismo. We need to go out of that approach to start cooperating with partnerships. And we need to transcend the North-South divide, because now some local governments from the so-called Global South are now donors and are now participants and partners of other governments in the world. Especially having China as part of the global south, we need to question how the north-south divide is working right now. Just an example of how decentralized cooperation, meaning the cooperation of local governments in Mexico, is performing. Almost, well, the most cooperation agreements and projects we have here is they're about environment, urban development, education, and arts and culture. So environment is one of the most important aspects for decentralized cooperation, where local governments are performing very well. And in the last discussion we are talking about in Glasgow is how to regulate sectors, economic sectors. We have one step ahead given, which is the Hacia agreement, which deals about aviation, how aviation can reduce its emissions. However, if we see this chart where the new wave of trade agreements are including every day more and more different policy areas, including environment and climate goals, we see that new agreements.
Sorry, Marcela
Yes.
Lopez Vallejo, please 1 minute, please.
Yes. So we are having more topics into trade. So, you know, we are discussing into Glasgow. So why not go back to what local governments are doing? They're doing pretty important stuff in this area. So just the last slide, final thoughts and ideas for discussion. Especially I want to pose some questions and some ideas. The first one is, does new multilateralism need new diplomatic practices and agents? How do traditional and new multilateralism complement each other, compete among each other, or substitute each other? How to identify hierarchy, power, and politics in new multilateralism? It is necessary to acknowledge also that traditional multilateralism will still privilege states, right? And the final thought is that new multilateralism addresses effective and localized communication both ways. We need to bridge the gap between the traditional and the new multilateralism, and between here academia and other actors in decision making. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to share thoughts with you.
Thank you very much, Doctora Marcela Lopez Vallejo. Now I'm going to introduce Dr. Gerardo Rodriguez Sanchez Lara. He is academic director and full-time professor at the Department of International Relations and Political Science at the University de las Américas, Puebla, in Mexico, of course. He is professor at National Defense College and at the Center of the Army Studies in Mexico. He is member of the Latin American Observatory of Organized Crime of the Frederick Ebert Steinfurt Foundation in Colombia. His last publication is about national security in Mexico and its structural problems. So, Dr. Rodriguez, you have the voice, please, for your presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Lourdes. It is a great honor to be in this Congress with Professor Fulviatina and Emilio. I don't know what time is right now in Italy. It's a half. Thank you for being in Mexican hours. From Italy, Emilio, thank you for being in the AMEI Congress. Thank you, Marcela, for your presentation. It's an honor also to be with you and Lourdes. Let me share a small presentation. Post-disabled participants screen sharing. Please, if you can help me to be co-host to share a small presentation.
The staff, please. We can see it. We can see it, Gerardo. No sé, el staff si nos pueden apoyar, por favor, para la presentación. Solo dale compartir pantalla y debería correr sin ningún problema. Tenemos solo 15 minutos.
Yes, I'm not co-host. Well, okay, so I'm going to begin. I'm going to talk about the global trends in money laundering and international financial flows and the challenges for multilateral policies. If you can send me Lourdes when I'm co-host, please help me.
Yes, I'm not co-host either. So
yeah,
I don't know if the staff can help us.
Yes.
Please.
Perfect. Yes.
Okay.
I'm already co-host. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to present this policy brief that I presented last year with a friend from Real Instituto Elcano from Spain about how to monitor countries' commitment against illicit financial flows. And because of my interest of investigation is about international crime and money laundering, we think that the commitment in multilateral fora about illicit financial flows is one of the most important topics on the multilateral agenda. But let me say you some things. You all already know about the Pandora Papers. And the Pandora Papers are by far the most important leaking papers about international financial flows in the last 7 years. They were, what we know about the Pandora Papers is that illicit financial flows were at least 10% more than the Panama Papers told us about these financial secrecy and tax havens, not also Panama, but also other islands in the world. Well, this is our paper, and let me say some data. Illicit financial flows and also arms flows are the target 16.4 from the Sustainable Development Goals. But unfortunately, this is one of the least interesting target for the UN members. Let's see the data. The target 16.4 is the least interesting and the target with the less budget from the UN members. So, as you all know, there is a phrase: if something is from your interest for policies in your government, you have to give money. If you don't have money in your pocket for these policies, it is not for your great interest. Here we are seeing which are the top 10 donors that are peanuts for international cooperation money. We are seeing the UNDP, the European Union, but this is real peanuts for a real international important goal. Let's see also which are the 10 recipient offices. I was thinking when I was seeing these graphics, maybe Panama or the US and the UK Virgin Islands, also Mexico or Italy will be in the top interest for recipients offices for preventing illicit financial flows, but not. It is Bosnia and Herzegovina, it is Kosovo, it is Argentina. So this is not a top goal for the UNDP and the UN entirely. Which are the categories of activities that may generate illicit financial flows? Well, we know that there are the illicit tax and commercial practices, the illegal markets for sure, drugs, arms, human trafficking, and wildlife. Wildlife is by far the fourth illicit market with information of the World Bank. For sure, corruption, governmental corruption, and in the fourth category, exploitation, type, and terrorism. Well, our conclusions about this problem and what we brought to the T20, to the G20 last meeting in Saudi Arabia, and congratulations that Italy is now the host of the G20 for this year. Despite the international consensus on the need to tackle illicit financial flows, the UN has not agreed first on a method in tracking this issue. Professor Fulvio Atina said clearly, we need to measure the commitments on multilateral cooperation. And while the quantification of international financial flows does not seem feasible, we propose a measurement that can provide a great picture on how it is a commitment, at least of the G20 countries, on its commitment on international financial flows. I'm not going to explain the 5 techniques commonly used to measure international financial flows. As you already know, it is quite difficult to know the financial flows on narcotics, arms, human trafficking. But what we can measure and to impose at least public sanctions is on the commitments on what we know that are the 40 recommendations of the GAFI, it is called in Mexico, the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, that is an intergovernmental organization inside the OCDE, and it was created 25 years ago in a G7 meeting in Europe. We can measure the commitments of at least the G20 countries. And measuring the commitments on international financial flows, we see this graphic, and what we can see is, for example, that in Europe, Spain, the UK are the top 2 leaders on IFF commitments. Then we are seeing Saudi Arabia, then Italy, Australia, Turkey, Canada, US, China, Indonesia, and what for me is a shaming point that Mexico is one of the less committed country on controlling international financial flows. I'm closing my presentation with at least 3 recommendations. There are simple recommendations, but that the G20 countries can commit with the support, for example, of the OCDE, IMF, the World Bank, Board of Governors, how to make pressure to the governments on this problem. No? The first thing is shift the focus of international monitoring initiatives from IFF to financial transparency. The next recommendation is to adopt the GAFI, in Spanish, FATF compliance indicators and similar indicators. From a technical standpoint, official indicators on financial transparency could be produced and communicated by the intergovernmental institutions that have made specific and practical contributions to the international agenda on financial transparency. And finally, tap into the G20 comparative advantage to strengthen peer pressure on financial transparency. I think that the FATF 40 recommendations and how the governments have made them real good indicators. The FATF has right now is the international standards, for example, for preventing money laundering and preventing terrorism financing. So I think that we don't need huge elephantic institutions for monitoring a multilateral agenda and commitments. FATF is a good example on how the ministers of finance can commit on multilateral agenda. Thank you to AMEI for the presentation of these results that Professor Aitor Perez from Real Instituto Elcano from Spain and for myself from MOTLAB recently present at the G20. Thank you, Lourdes.
Thank you very much, Maestro Gerardo Rodriguez. Well, we have just 2 minutes or something like that to close. So we don't have here any question. Anyway, if there's one, I can send these questions to you by email. And I just want to give you the thanks. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate that all of you attend this special joint panel. It was really very interesting, all the things, all the themes that you posed on the table. So in another time, I'm sure that we will have the opportunity to discuss them with more time and with more detail, viewing some more detailed things about all of these topics. Very interesting. So thank you very much for the Italian Association of Political Science, for AMEI, for the staff, and all of you. Of course, our colleagues in Italy. It's late now. So thank you very much for being here with us, Gerardo, Marcela.
Thank you to all of you, and I appreciate also the complementarity of the presentations in this panel, very high. Thank you.
Thank you, nice to meet you.
Good night, Fulvio, Emilio. Good night.
Thank you, enjoy the conference
from Mexico.
for more hours.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Big up from Mexico. Thank you, Marcela. Thank you, Lourdes.
Gerardo,
Thank
Lourdes,
you.
gracias.
Hasta luego. Buenas noches.